Hi everyone, I am honored to introduce our guest speaker for the closing conversation of the Innovation and New ID session at the Human Advantage Conference. Now, Emily Boots, who is head of BVA Data Factory and one of the BVA's group champion for innovation, and myself will be speaking with Matt Wallaert. For almost 20 years, Matt Wallaert has been applying behavioral science to practical problems. Matt has been the first director of behavioral science at Microsoft, a small company. After leaving academia, his career as an executive led from startups to the Fortune 500 and back again before joining Frog, which is a Capgemini company, as the head of behavioral science, where he focuses on helping organizations build their own applied behavioral science capabilities. And I think you have created something very new in this area while building with the Frog team. In his book, because Matt has also published a book, Start at the End, and other writing as well as hundreds of talks from the UN, another small organization, to SXSW, Matt details how the cycle of behavioral strategy, insight, design, and impact evaluation can help us build product and services that change behavior. So Matt is clearly the perfect speaker to end our session on innovation. So welcome, Matt. A big thank you for being with us today. We are very excited to have you at the Human Advantage Conference. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm super happy to be here.
Hi, Matt. So, my first question, not very surprisingly, is about new product design. Why do you think that the typical process, the typical product design process that we have in place, leads kind of constantly to failures? Do you think that it's something that we could change with behavioral science?
I mean, I have spent the last 20 years of my life in behavioral science, so I have a bias, and I can acknowledge this bias, which is, of course, I think I could change it with behavioral science. I think it's hard to say where the typical behavioral design or sort of the current product design process falls down, in part because I'm not sure we know what typical means. When I work with companies, it's very surprising to me how different companies are making products. I think if you think of product design in sort of two halves, in terms of, build the right thing and build the thing right. I think we've made a lot of progress on the build the thing right side. We know more about technical product management than probably we ever have. We're very good at producing things. We know how to get engineers to do things in an efficient way. Like, we're good at making things. We have good testing facilities for doing things like usability, et cetera. Where I think we're falling down is the build the right thing side. A lot of what we decide to build is unfortunately just the idea of an executive who decides that that's the right answer and with very little evidence says, this is what we're going to do, right? Unfortunately, those executives are often older, often male, often white, right? And those decisions are made relatively in isolation, right? They're making the decision based on inputs rather than sort of, a collective decision-making process. And so I think that leads to, a bunch of products that are made by or ideated by a group of people who are wealthy and white and male and older. And, when that hits the market, who's not all wealthy and older and white and male and an executive in a company, there's some failures there.
Yeah, I guess that's why it explains also that massive advertising campaigns are not really helping.
Yeah, if you make a terrible cake, you can put all the icing you want on it, but the cake is still terrible.
So I've read your book, great book, by the way. So you came up with a new process that's called IDP, Intervention Design Process. Can you tell us about that? Can you tell us what are the steps and what actually behavioral science brings to it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think, to be clear, I have articulated a model for doing this. I think there's lots of models. I think we need more models. I think a plurality of models is good. I think what should unite all models is at the basis of behavioral science, right? Behavior is an outcome, science is a process. So we have to start from a place where we are articulating the behaviors that we want to create in the world at the end, right? The book is called Start at the End for a reason. We have to know where we want to arrive in an observable way. I talk to CEOs all the time who are like, I want people to love my product. I'm like, cool. What does that mean? Love can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Do you mean use the product, buy the product, recommend the product? All of those are different behaviors. What is it that you mean by that? So it's that articulation of behavior and then using a scientific method to do that. So at least in my process, we do that in 4 steps, right? We talk about strategy, right? And this is sort of that part where we work with stakeholders and business executives and other folks to understand what is it we actually want to do in the world. We use something called a behavioral statement. It's a pre-formatted statement when a target audience who has some limitations and a motivation wants to behavior, they will behavior as measured by data, right? So it's got a motivation and a behavior. It's a very precise articulation of the world as we want it to exist in the world. Now, it seems people often look at this template and are like, I can fill that out in a snap. I don't think it's that easy. I actually think it's the hardest step in the whole process, is articulating what do we physically, literally want people to do? Data, which I know is your realm these days, is a really great example of that, right? We're like, we want people to make data-driven decisions. Cool, what does that mean, right? How would I even know that it happened? How would I measure it? How would I observe it? Who is doing it? Like when I say I want people to do it, who am I talking about, right? Why would they want to do that? What are the limitations to them doing that? So getting into that really precise articulation of strategy, I think is a big first step. Then we need to draw insights, right? I actually think science fiction is a lovely analogy for this, right? We have to imagine the world we want, and then we have to observe the world we have, right? We want to do that through quantitative and qualitative science, right? What we might think of as data science and user research. So we can understand the distance between these two worlds and why that distance exists. Then in the third step, we need to go into some kind of design process, right? So we need to understand, well, if these are the insights that we have, how are we going to use them to bridge the distance between the two? And our insights take a really specific format. One, why would anyone want to live in this alternative world? Why is that a better world than the world that we have today? And two, given that it's an attractive world, why don't we already live there? We talk about those as promoting pressures, things that make a behavior more likely, and inhibiting pressures, things that make a behavior less likely. So when we're designing, we don't actually design to change behavior. I can't pop open Eric's brain and find the love my product button and press it and magically it happens, right? That's not how science works. Instead, I modify the pressures in Eric's environment that then change his behavior. So it's changing pressures to change behavior. So we design for pressure change, and then we have to run a pilot. The hallmark of any good scientific process is experimentation. We need to try things at a variety of scales to gather the evidence we need to scale them. Many companies either don't run pilots at all or rush to very large pilots with very little evidence that those will work. And we end up in long 6-month cycles, wasting tens of millions of dollars on things that we ultimately are not going to launch. And so it's that small iterative process of piloting that we have to get good at as an industry. So for me, that's the 4 steps. It's behavior as an outcome, science as a process, using strategy, insights, design, and then some sort of experimentation or impact evaluation.
Yeah, and so you just mentioned Start at the End, and Start at the End is the name of the book, so it's really your main focus and your main point. Can you tell us a bit more about what you mean by that? And can you also maybe explain why you believe that putting behavior change first is really critical?
Yeah, I mean, I think people have a rush to solutioning. It is built into the modern business process that what is valued is the ideas for interventions, what we're actually going to do. But let's say that Eric is, the head of a seating company, and he says to me, Matt, he comes to Frog and he says, I want you to design a new chair. What he really means is that he wants to design something that will cause people to sit. And that seems like, well, Matt, okay, that's kind of a pedantic difference. But when we say, hey, I want to design something that causes people to sit, maybe it's not a chair. Maybe it's a beanbag. Maybe it's a bench. Maybe it's a yoga ball. Maybe it's a pair of anti-gravity pants where you just sort of lean back and make a sitting motion, right? When we start at the end, what we want, you actually can get to a wider range of solutions that are more inclusive, more interesting, more accessible, right? And that's why we need that end focus on a very specific behavior. What is it I actually physically, literally want people to do in the world, so that I then can come back to a set of solutions that are I think, more diverse and more interesting. A lot of what we do when we start, other academics in the conference might have talked about anchoring bias, right? If I say, if I start you with the number 10, you're going to stay in the realm of 10. If I start you in the number 100, you're going to stay in the realm of 100. By starting at the end with the perfect, sort of in the world, if the world was exactly the way I want, what would be happening? We stretch farther, right? We're not starting from today and iterating forward. We're starting from what we want and iterating backwards. And that's a huge difference, right? Because you might not actually achieve your ultimate goal, but you'll get a lot closer than if you started at what we have today.
And do you have, Matt, any example of a company who have followed this idea of starting at the end, focusing on behavior change?
Yeah, I think a lot of companies are starting to get a better idea of how to pivot to this. We worked with folks at Frog. It's been a fun journey at Frog, getting folks to do this. One of the examples that I use in the book pretty consistently is Uber, right? Uber had a very clear articulation and understanding of the world that they wanted to create, which was a world where, sort of the majority of people didn't own cars and instead were taking other forms of transit that were owned by others. And, they have, for better or worse, sort of marched towards that place. Now, it's not an endorsement of Uber, right? Travis is a massive sexist and I hope he loses all of his money, but they did have a very clear articulation and understanding of this is the kind of world that we want to create. We know what it's going to look like when we do it the right way. And they were very dogged in pursuing that with very little modification.
So I have one last question, and it's a bit of a, kind of like selfish question. As, the head of the data factory, I'm very kind of like focused on applying behavioral science and data science together. So I guess, my question is, do you believe that it is a winning strategy for new product design to combine both data science and behavioral science? And if you have any example that you could share with us, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of thoughts on data science. I mean, one of the cardinal sins to me in modern business is that data science and user research often live in different parts of the business and are uncoordinated with each other. As a scientist, I believe in combining quantitative insights, right? Things we derive from data, with qualitative insights, things we can observe in the world from people, right? And that's been a hallmark of psychological science for 100 years, right? Much of what we think of as the modern scientific method evolved from people observing the world around them, observational science, and then moving to experimental science, which typically involves data. So I want to see those two brought closer together. I think insights has two really key places, at least in my articulation. One is in the insights phase. They really own that phase, right? They need to tell me what are the promoting and inhibiting pressures that are causing people to act the way that they do today, right? How can we observe the world today to understand why we're not in the ideal world, why we're still stuck here, right? And then two, I need them again in the last step, right? I need them to be able to tell me, do these pilots work? Where work means both something from a data perspective, but it also means something qualitative, right? You can get data that says, yeah, I got everybody to sit down, but they hate me and they hate the product. That's not where we want to go, right? We need that blend of quant and qual. And I think the other mistake that companies make is only engaging them on those two stages, right? I kick them out of the room during the design phase and I kick them out of the room during the business strategy phase. No, they need to be there the whole time. There's important context and there's important diversity of perspective that they bring. One of the companies I think does this fabulously well is one of my former employers, Clover Health, right? So I was chief behavioral officer at Clover Health, and they really invested early on in the company in the ability for everybody at the company to be data literate in a way that they could start to make and understand data-driven decision-making, right? So even if they weren't personally analyzing the data, they could understand at a core level the insights that were being given to them. This is really important. So you think about things like one of the projects I worked on there was flu shots, right? And, if you asked an executive, well, how valuable do you think it is to the company if we get Eric to get a flu shot? Eric's one of our members. If I get Eric to get a flu shot, how much money do you think that either makes for the company in profit or at least reduces our hospitalization costs? And everybody's estimate was about $10. And when we went and did the work with the actuaries, actually it was a lot closer to $100, right? That's a huge difference, right? Because if I came to you, Emily, and you were the CEO of Clover, and I said, hey, I have an intervention, and for $50, I can get everybody to get a flu shot. Well, if you think flu shots are only worth $10, you're like, Matt, you're fired. That's a terrible idea. You want to spend $50 to make $10? Terrible business idea. But if it's $100, hey, suddenly $50 makes a lot more sense. I think a lot of companies don't understand at a fundamental level their unit economics of behaviors, right? And how much they actually make if they can change a behavior. And I think that's fundamental work that we need increased sort of data and finance knowledge about. And I think actuaries are really exciting places to do that. I think I would love to see a behavioral science informed CFO. I think Amy Hood at Microsoft is a great example of somebody who I think has made great strides for helping Microsoft understand, hey, what is the true value of usage over the true value of sales, right? You've seen that entire organization pivot to a usage-based model instead of a license-based model. I think that was a great victory. So I think there's a lot of really good examples from the market.
Great, I'll keep that in mind. That was very insightful. I think Eric has one last special question for you.
Yeah. Maybe one final question before we move to our next session. In fact, it is the same that I have asked before to John List in our conversation, and I think it is a very important one for our audience. What is your one piece of advice that you would give to a chief innovation officer who want to start applying behavioral science to their work?
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic question. I'll give a controversial answer because I think it's the role of speakers to push the bounds a little bit. What I would say is stop thinking about behavioral scientists, right, as a singular noun role that you can point to someone and be like, that over there, that's our behavioral scientist. Behavioral science is a process that you use. It is a discipline that you apply. And it's one that can be applied by designers and strategists and data scientists and qualitative researchers and all these different roles. So rather than thinking of it as something that, you hire one of, try to think of it as something that your whole team does, right? It's a set of capabilities and skills that they can learn. Many of your employees don't even know basic experimentation skills. How do you teach those? How do you upskill the people that you have? They're all capable of understanding them. They just haven't been taught that probably since about 8th grade, right? How do you bring back those skills that are useful to them so that they can do that in situ of where they are? So that's my tip. My tip is stop thinking about hiring a behavioral scientist. Maybe you need a behavioral science leader, but start thinking about how you're going to upskill your whole team to a place where they have these skills and are able to engage. Show them this conference, get them involved, have them watch and read and learn the things that they can do.
Yeah, well, I'll just add one more thing. I really like the example in the book about the janitor at Pepsi, at Frito-Lay. And that was about, bringing the culture also to help kind of like embrace the behavioral science culture.
100%. And it turns out that's an apocryphal story. It's not actually how I found out after the creation that's not how Flaming Hot Cheetos came about. But it's still, I'll give a second tip, Eric. I'm gonna horn in and I'll give a second tip, which is fiction, right? We have this gravitation towards non-fictional books, non-fictional stories, things that are true. There's a lot of truth to be had in fiction. Even if that story turns out to be apocryphal, it is still a good demonstration of the world as we want it to exist. One where a janitorial worker can suggest an idea and we have a way to ingest that and we have a way to interact with it and we have a way to help them promote it, right? Even if that's not what happened with Flaming Hot Cheetos, I don't really care. Right? What I care about is that is how we want it to happen in your company. So take the lesson from that. Read fiction, right? Don't read my book, read fiction books. Fiction helps us imagine these imaginary worlds and how we get there from the world we have. Particularly science fiction does that. So stop thinking about a singular behavioral scientist and read science fiction.
Thanks a lot, Matt. It was a fantastic conversation. Thanks for your insight. It was great to have you at the Human Advantage Conference.